Hey everyone, welcome back to You Are Here Season 3. That's crazy to say. I'm your host, Danny, and this is a podcast all about growing up and figuring it out together. I am so excited to continue this journey of figuring out life, of my observations, of hearing more people's stories and growing this community here on YouTube and across all the podcast platforms and etc. So I'm just so excited, and I'm I mean, it's been not a year, but it's been like a few months since we've filmed something. And so I just kind of wanted to give a refresh on what this podcast is, what it means, what the purpose of it is, what I feel like its purpose is. So I started this podcast when I turned 24, right? No, when I turned 25. Oops. When I turned 25, and I really had the just passion to talk about life and growing up because I was having a lot of the same conversations with my friends about growing up, about figuring out life, about relationships we have with other people, about romance, about just everything, right? And we all also happen to be in Christian circles and Christian young people, and so we had all the same conversations. And so I just thought it was very interesting. And from that observation, I thought, there needs to be a space online where there is a convergence of the culture that all of my friends who are my age, millennial, Gen Z, and some millennial, Gen Z, and then the convergence of our age group with our faith and also culture. And I think there really is no space to do that online that I've seen that talks freely about these topics. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to make that space, and this is what it still is. And this year I really want to focus on talking more about faith in tandem with culture and things that are happening in culture. I am such a pop culture girl. I love scrolling on Twitter. I love TikTok. We're praying for TikTok. I love just everything that has to do with pop culture and media. And I also love Jesus, and I want to talk about how those things are relevant, or how those things come together, or how to walk the line as a believer and as somebody who also just exists in the world today. But yeah, so I'm really excited about this episode. I tend to think about things like a anthropologist. When I speak, I hope you don't hear absolutes. I'm never speaking in absolutes, even if it sounds like I am. I'm very open to having my mind changed or being challenged to my ideas. In fact, I love a challenge. I welcome challenge because ultimately I believe it makes me better, and it will make you better as well if you invite it. So, yeah, please feel free to engage with me and my ideas in the comments. I'm open to it. And yeah, let's get into it. Sorry if I kept on saying I'm excited, and that's my default word. I also feel like there's a fuzz on the side of my nose, so just give me a moment. Yeah, so let's get into it. Season 3, to kick it off, we are talking about something that I have been thinking about for a lot. Honestly, I would say a majority of 2024. This is what was taking up my thoughts. And it's the topic, the idea of selling God. And I think it's very important to understand just the way that the world works by marketing. It's kind of always been that way, but especially now with the internet and the way that the world moves and it's so interconnected. I think it's a very interesting observation to make in the way that Christians, evangelicals, specifically in America, of course, basically market Christianity. And so today I want to answer the question, or take a deep dive into the question of what's the deal with Christian media. And I also am going to go through essentially like a timeline, again, an anthropological approach to the current state that we find ourselves. And hopefully you find some really interesting ideas, some inspiration, and maybe you get curious about the world around you, or the world or the paradigm that has been handed to you about Christian media, Christians' influence in media, whatever. But yeah, so let's get into it. Okay, so first, you have to start with the history of the way Christians would market, right? I think it's also important to note that in the United States specifically, the United States is a very Protestant kind of place. Our forefathers had some kind of Christian life, Christian ideals, Christian morals embedded into them. And I don't think they were wrong for that at all. I think Christianity is a great foundation for all treating people fairly, for justice, for equality, for all those things. I think Christianity is a fantastic foundation for that. However, I think from the genesis of this country, faith being so intertwined with government, with politics, all of those things has been more difficult as culture, as we get more people into the world who as we have more opinions, as we have more legislation and all these different things. I think it becomes a little bit more complicated to just be that foundation. And I also think God knew that, of course. I think there was such a like a wisdom in creating all of us and creating so much diversity within us, that we would have to work together, that we'd have to figure out the best way forward. And so I don't think it came as a shock to God, but boy, I think the way that Christians have kind of taken the reins is kind of shocking to think about now. And so I think history, the way that America was formed, I think is important to just acknowledge that there's a lot of Christianity in American roots. And then I think moving forward, Christianity and its place in America. So America, you go to any other country in the world, and people who want to come to America say, I want to come to America, the American dream. People who are in America who've gotten the American dream talk about the American dream. I come from an immigrant family. We are living the American dream to a degree. You know what I mean? And so I know that this American dream is a ideal, of course. It's not like anything that you can tangibly touch or feel or say, do anything. But it is this idea that you can make your own way in this country easier or more equal than any other country in the world. And I think that is a beautiful thing. However, I think the American dream, it also tends to be conflated with just the sin of greed and wanting more and getting more for the sake of it being a possibility to do so. And I think that is where so much of what's going on with what we see now with Christian media, and honestly, I think to a degree it's undoing happening at the minute. And what's going on with our generation interacting with Christian media. So the history of Christian media in this country is very interesting, I think. So I grew up watching, old evangelists like Benny Hinn, like Kenneth Copeland, like James Robinson, all those guys. And they were probably the first like Christian millionaires. They began normal like evangelists, traveling, going to different places. I'm not really sure what their theological backgrounds are, but on a side note, I that way of course evangelizing, which is the very Billy Graham kind of way of going to all these places and getting and bringing loads of salvations, etc. Not saying God didn't use those things. Of course he did. He used every single person that I'm talking about right now. However, I think there were just things that fell through the cracks with those kinds of events. Am very for the idea that, the Great Commission, God calls us to make disciples, not necessarily to get people saved. That's a very Baptist way of thinking, just putting that out there as well. You get people saved, you get people baptized, and then you get them in some kind of track that does a discipleship for you. But, walking with someone, doing life with someone, you can be a Christian who has brought millions of people to salvation and you yourself have never been discipled. So I'm just putting that out there. Okay. Anyways, so I think that model of evangelism is old and like no one really does it like that to to those scales anymore. But that's kind of where Christian media began, right? These men obviously became very, very famous. They became within the church sphere, of course. They a huge part of obviously Christian organizations is donations. So they were making money to a degree somehow to support their ministry. So there's a lot of like dodgy stuff with the money side, but I don't want to get into all of that. But you can kind of fill in the gaps, okay? So that is the beginning of Christian marketing. From there, we see a spiral into these men writing books, writing workbooks, writing things for churches, writing all these different things. And then kind of from there, you begin seeing the spiral into the megachurch and what that looks like in America. There is there's a few very large international churches that came to America to be inspired on how to bring the megachurch back to their countries. So I think that's also very interesting. But again, I think it's, to me, I can't help but not see the conflation between like American dream, the promise of having as much as you want because you can, and then also like, oh well, God just blessed us immensely, etc., etc. And I think like two things of course can be true at once, but I think at some point people, we got our wires crossed here. So that's essentially the history of what Christian media was like in those times, and it's very recent as well. I would say probably like 70s is when we had the hippie revival, so that's when loads of hippies of course were getting saved, and then from the 70s I think on, there's kind of like this spiral of, oh, I think there's, I mean, money to be made, which sucks, but I think really. And so then from the megachurch, from the birth of the megachurch, then now we have more media opportunities. Now we're making music. Now we're making, there's actually such a great documentary called Jesus Music, I believe. And it's actually the history of contemporary Christian music as like a genre. And that began in like the late 80s, early 90s. It's fascinating because it's so new. But I think stuff like that where, okay, well, this is obviously working for Madonna, for Prince, for Michael Jackson, and they're making millions. Surely, again, there's money to be made here. And it's so hard to say like this is a wrong thing. And I'm not saying anything is wrong. I'm just saying the only model the church has ever had in this modern context is pop culture and is normal culture. And I think this is kind of where the rubber meets the road in the sense of how much should Christians glean from pop culture, and how much in terms of ministry, in terms of discipleship, in terms of all those things that really are so deeply spiritual, but also like our Christian mandate. How much of those things do we let industries take a hold of? Because ultimately industries are unreliable in terms of morality, you know? Okay. So we have Christian media, we have Christian music, Christian books, Christian movies, Christian shows. And I was a consumer of all these things. I was a pastor's kid in like a very small town. Of course, I was listening to Carmen. Of course, I was watching Bible Man. Of course, I loved VeggieTales. Like that was my bread and butter. That was my what do you call it in like Catholic school? Is it catechism? I think it is. That was my catechism. Okay. And I was all about it. But I think as history goes on and as we progress in society, I think of course the internet came in, Y2K, all that, which was huge, to be so connected to everything, to have all this information. And then of course you have iPhones, all these things. In my notes, I said history, present day. In the middle, I put art died. And you have to understand there is something happening here with Christianity. I saw an exceptional quote from, honestly, probably a TikTok. I can't not even remember, from something. And he said how the thing that makes Christian art so bad is the fact that Christians have to leave the audience with the same question to answer, and they're giving them the answer. It's the whole joke of if you're in class and a Christian anything and they say a question, you just answer Jesus and it's the answer. It's that. It's that idea of you're not letting the audience do any work for themselves. You're not leaving them feeling any kind of way. And that's why the media was so bad. I think any Christian movie, the Left Behind series, which then became book or movies, was so crazy. And I mean, very crazy in a good way, lucrative in the sense that it was so popular. Everybody was talking about it. Everyone was addicted to Kirk Cameron. Like, it was just a whole moment in pop culture and our Christian pop culture. And then for essentially like the books, obviously no one talks about them anymore. For the most part, I think also a lot of Christians my age, that kind of theology has been discredited by just knowing things, by people going to school, being more educated, people caring more about faith because of being exposed to so many other faiths in our world being so much more diverse and much more like diverse at our fingertips. I feel like the world has gotten less segregated in terms of the people that we know, the way that we live, because we are exposed to every kind of person online. So I think it's just something very interesting. And so because that reason or those reasons, I think that those kinds of thinking or that kind of theology, rapture theology, has kind of gone away. Even when I went to Bible college, they didn't teach me that rapture theology. So, anyways, I just think that's very interesting. But art died because all of these modes of and ways of getting you, ultimately, they were all getting you to try to believe in Jesus. It was all an evangelistic tool, which I think there are excellent there's a great example, I think, of a Christian evangelistic tool that is used today but is so well done, is The Chosen. I think that series is phenomenal. I think they capture the nuance of being a human being whilst also believing in Jesus. And I think that is the missing key for all of the previous previous books, whatever, fill in the blank, because there is never any ambiguity in these things. And ultimately, to live is to face ambiguity. To live is to be unsure, to live with unknowns, to address your doubts. And I think that is what makes art so magnificent and so poignant in certain times in your walks with God or your walk with friends or your walk with your family, whatever it is. And that's why art pulls you in and what makes it so important. And so I think when Christians remove all those things to give them the result that they believe God wants for them or whatever, I think that's kind of where you lose that the thing that makes us human is the fact that we get to choose. So for Christians to remove choice from art, I think is very telling, of course, and sad. I also put Capitalism USA, which I kind of already touched on, but I do think that there is something else to say about the industry thing. Christians looked at the $1 million companies, the industries that were making the most money, that were working with the next generation, like music, like movies, like film. And then they thought, well, how can we adapt those to Christians? And how can we, put Christian whatever into them? And I think, again, there are great examples, and I'm sure God did use those examples in people's lives. I think industries don't have morals at the end of the day. The people that you're talking to care more about a bottom line than they do about people. And Christians care more about people than we do a bottom line, or we should. And when you conflate these two things and these things become so interconnected that you can't tell them apart, I think that's when you have very hurt people, of course, and when you have very confused believers and even theology. You can't tell someone, well, you should go suffer for the gospel while you're living in $1 million mansion. That conflation doesn't make sense, especially to like millennials, Gen Z, who lived through all of these things and who are so confused of like it'd be like, it just feels crazy. It feels crazy. And Yeah, and for me especially, I think like you're listening to someone tell you you should go suffer for the gospel, who they they're the ones who are preying on people who don't even have enough money to eat that week or whatever, and they're the ones who are like, well, God, if I don't send this money now, like God's not going to bless me, or I'm not going to get the jubilee, or I'm not going to get the anointing oil that is going to heal me. Stuff like that, that feels crazy to me, and dare I say, vicious. So I don't like that. But present day, I think we're in a very interesting new kind of Christian media where obviously now we have podcasts, which I suppose I'm a part of that. But I like to think I'm different. We have Christian media, which now kind of looks more. There still are Christian television stations like TBN, like Daystar, etc. But it's a lot of influencers. It's a lot of podcasts. It's a lot of, more conversations. And I think it's because my generation has a very different perspective than previous. Like I was saying, my generation has been afforded the opportunity to be interact with so many different kinds of people because of the internet. And because of that, I think we see the complications in the ideal of Christianity. This is something I was thinking about late last night. I think previously, the way Christianity was sold, to be, frank, previously was like a Ralph Lauren. So Ralph Lauren is, Ralph Lauren, this incredible fashion brand. They have Polo, they have Ralph Lauren, they have Purple Label, they have all these different kinds of Ralph Lauren, but ultimately the whole dream of Ralph Lauren is this idyllic, gorgeous American dream, Americana vibe, right? The photo shoots are beautiful, and basically what Ralph did, he changed the fashion and the marketing and the consumer forever. He created a world that you'd want to buy into. And I think that Christians kind of had this, Christian media specifically had this kind of idea as well. It was like the Christian ideal. You would see a husband and a wife on TV and they would be happy. They would talk to other happy couples. They would sing beautiful songs. They would talk about, only good things, only happy things, only things that reaffirmed that they were blessed, chosen by God, and then they would tell you how to do that as well. And again, it was the selling this ideal that good Christians buy this, or good Christians are reading this, or if you want to be a good wife, you need to read this. If you want to be a good husband, you need to read this, etc., etc. But it was selling this ideal, this world. And I think my generation came into the picture and saw how that ideal actually served no one but the people who were selling it, right? And I think that sucks, of course, to realize. And I think Christianity and the way that it comes together with culture is, I guess with my culture, I should say, the way that it comes together with my culture is now they're meeting us where we're at. And I think, of course, I think it's less selly, I think it's less, people aren't offering you books on social media for the most part, or at least not on my FYP. But I haven't seen Christian influencers try to like sell me things very much or whatever. But I think I find it interesting. Now it's kind of this like all or nothing rhetoric, where I think before it was this, well, before it was more like, oh, if you have a couple in your life that's having problems, you should give them this book. Or if you are having, I felt like it was more, they previously, like the TBN days, whatever, they were more integrating Christianity into their everyday life because they were aware of how segregated, how you live in your little bubbles, kind of it was. So it was kind of, your evangelism was happening within those bubbles. And now I think because the world is so interconnected, the conversation around evangelism has switched to where now it's, you are evangelizing every single day. It's this all or nothing thing. It's this, if you have a platform and you're a Christian, you are doing God a disservice to by not making it all about him, that etc. etc. And it's this like very all or nothing kind of conversation. You're I don't know, all these things. I think it's very interesting. And of course, you should, if you are choosing to follow Jesus, you should have an understanding that it's actually so much more than just making your whole social media page about Jesus. Your whole it's so much more than the image you present online is basically what I'm trying to say. And I think it's so funny that I think a lot of Christian influencers have this idea, or at least what they say, what they communicate on their platforms is that, you know, if you should be making content about Jesus, you should be taking content at your church about going to church. I don't know. It just feels very that feels strange to me as well. And it feels like this a similar version of what was happening previously in history. And again, it's this whole idea that these industries don't understand Christianity. They weren't made for faith. And I think, and it goes back as well to the beginning of America. Our structure, our foundation was built upon Christian principles. And I think it's hard, and it's so hard when you are given something like government, which was previously was empires, was monarchs, which also had their version of faith or Catholicism or Christianity, Protestantism in their government structures as well. But I just think it's very interesting. And I think anytime you try to mix faith and Christianity, or sorry, not faith and Christianity, but like an industry and Christianity, or a world power structure and Christianity, there's always this the friction, and I mean that negatively, that happens. And I think present day, what's going on is a lot of these TV networks that we've seen that were Christian have fallen apart, and they have, I mean, not just fallen apart, but they have absolutely imploded. They have harmed people. A lot of these mega churches have had pastors fall or have had horrific cases happen within their church when it in terms of abuse or mistreatment, whatever. So I think all of these things, ultimately, I think it's a symptom of humanity, of course, and not saying God doesn't use these things. I've never said that once, actually. I keep on saying, of course, God uses these things. But I am saying, I think it's a very interesting perspective. And influencers, internet culture, all of those things are very new. And only time will tell, I suppose, about what we'll see here. But I just think it's a very interesting perspective that that now it seems like these young people have caught themselves in a similar boat as like older TV people. I think the difference is that social media actually invites people to be themselves and they want to see the real parts of them. However, Christians will always tend to lean more on the traditional side. So no matter what you do, no matter what you say, you'll always be put in the singular box of what being a Christian looks like, which is pure and whatever. And not saying that that's a bad thing either, but I am saying as a public image, I just don't think human beings are able to sustain a public standing that is unscathed forever. And I think that is the issue that we have with Christian public figures, whether that's influencers or mega church pastors or whatever. It's just not a role we were ever meant to possess as people. And yeah, I feel so silly saying this because I feel like I'm very quick to see contradictions, and I feel like me doing all of this and like being so critical, it feels like, or not maybe critical, but just sharing my opinion about how I see the world and stuff like that feels like a contradiction because I'm here doing the same thing to a degree. But again, I've been sharing my ideas for 3 years, and whether or not this takes off or anything doesn't matter. I enjoy doing it and I enjoy sharing my perspective. Because I don't think there's a person my age doing it. And I think my perspective is just interesting. It's interesting to me. It's interesting to people that I share with as well. And yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about is the future of what I think Christian media would look like. And really, I obviously am not a fortune teller and I don't know what the future holds, but I do have the hopes that I have. And I have been thinking about this for a while actually because of just the stuff that's happening on my For You page. But I think the future of Christianity, of Christian marketing, Christian influencers is that I think it becomes about the stranger and not about the person. And what I mean by that is kind of taking inspiration from people like man on the street videos of just people coming up like, oh, what do you do for a living? And it's all these strangers who are being asked, if you had one thing to tell the world, what would you tell them? And stuff like that. I think really that's what Christianity is about. It's bringing the stranger in. And I'm not saying I want my social media pages to be full of man on the street videos about Jesus. That's not what I'm saying. But I mean that there is something very special about, and really at the end of the day, like that is the gospel message, is just being curious about people, about strangers, about bringing in the sojourner, about bringing in people that you don't know, that you don't have any kind of context for, but you make a space for them. And I think that's really what it is. It's about bringing people together. And so, yeah, I would hope that Christian influencers embrace other ways of thinking and not in the ways, not that they're like adopting them into their faith. That's not all what I'm speaking about, but that they would invite conversations that would kind of freak them out, that would scare them, that would, open them up. I think also I would hope that the audiences who are consuming a lot of Christian content would allow Christians to be human. I think another huge fault in all of these things, and it's very easy to go after the public image people because they're the ones holding that space, the attention. However, I think there is always a responsibility to the audience to be literate in what they are consuming. And if you are following any kind of Christian influencer, author, actor, actress, whatever, and you're expecting them to follow God for you, you're not following God as the audience, like as the person watching. And I think that that's a huge gap within the influencer in whatever Christian public figure space and their audience. I think a lot of times people meet their Christian influencer in a time when they can just kind of borrow their faith. And so then that doesn't allow people to be human beings. And I think when you are seeing someone, when you admire someone, it's also so easy to make to conflate them and or to inflate them into this gigantic person when they're just a person. And so I think it's very important if you're consuming content. I hope that audiences become more conscious of that, and Christian audiences become more conscious of that, that that at a certain point you're responsible for this person as well, as much as they are for you. If they're a pastor, if they're a leader, what they're sharing to you can affect you, does affect your walk with God, affects the way you perceive God, but also the way that you receive these words from them also affects them. If you're putting them on a pedestal, saying that they're, whatever, that they're God's chosen voice for a generation, whatever. No, God can just decide to pick someone else one day. You know what I mean? And God's going to make this happen no matter what and no matter with who. And so I think it's just very important as an audience in the future. I hope that audiences get that knowledge. I hope that church leaders are allowed to be human. I hope that we see more healthy families in churches and more great marriages. I hope that in the Christian marketing space, we allow art to be ambiguous. We allow things to maybe settle with the uncomfortable parts of being human. And we let audiences make that deduction that they want Jesus from this piece that they're consuming, but not handing it to them on a silver platter. Because ultimately, I believe choice was the greatest gift that God gave us in the garden. And obviously we made the wrong choice, but that's also what makes God so amazing is he lets us make the wrong choice. And I think as artists who maybe want to make music or make films or make stories, allow your audience to make the wrong choice. And I think that is really what it comes down to, and it's very cool. But yeah, so I'm obviously very passionate about this. I hope you guys had fun listening to my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts, and I would love to, learn what you think, what your experience was growing up with Christian media. I mentioned a lot of throwback Christian shows, and other stuff. But yeah, this season is going to be really exciting. It's going to be more of my thoughts about the thing about Christianity, about pop culture, about those things coming together. It's going to be more conversations, hopefully, with very interesting people in my life who have also found themselves in the tension between those two things and worlds. And I think that's all I got for today. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment below. I don't know. Comment your favorite throwback Christian show, or comment something that you like that I said. I don't know. And then also please follow on social or on our social media. Yes, You Are Here Pod, my personal at Danielle Cianni. But you can also follow the podcast wherever you're listening, on Spotify, on Apple, on I don't know what else. I think that's it. I think that's everything. Thank you so much for listening. See you later. Bye.